the first time a little boy called me daddy. I hadn't even met his father. If someone had told me that sentence would one day become the beginning of the happiest chapter of my life, I would have smiled politely and assumed they had mistaken me for someone else. At 30 years old, I had grown comfortable with quiet routines and ordinary mornings. I taught art at a small elementary school just outside Portland, rented a modest apartment with too many books and too many houseplants, and spent most weekends wandering local farmers markets or sketching people who never realized they had become part of my notebook. My life wasn't lonely exactly, but it was carefully organized, almost protected, as if keeping everything predictable could stop disappointment from finding me again. That Saturday started like any other. The spring air carried the scent of fresh rain, coffee, and blooming cherry trees as families filled Riverside Park. Children laughed near the playground while dogs chased tennis balls across the grass. I found my usual bench overlooking the duck pond and opened my sketchbook, hoping to capture the reflection of the old wooden bridge before the sunlight shifted. It was peaceful, the kind of ordinary moment most people barely remembered. Then I heard tiny footsteps pounding across the sidewalk behind me. Before I could turn around, something wrapped around my leg with surprising determination. "Daddy," a cheerful little voice shouted. "I found you." I looked down in complete confusion. A little boy with soft brown curls and bright blue eyes hugged my knee as though he had known me forever. He couldn't have been older than 5. His baseball cap sat crooked on his head, and one of his sneakers was untied. His smile, however, was completely certain. "Daddy," he repeated proudly, looking up at me with absolute confidence. Nearby conversations faded as a few people glanced in our direction, smiling at what they assumed was a touching family reunion. My heart raced for a very different reason. I gently knelt to his level, careful not to frighten him. "Hey, buddy," I said with the calmest voice I could manage. "I think you might have the wrong person." He frowned, almost offended by the suggestion. "No," he answered with complete certainty. "You're my daddy." Before I could respond, another voice called from somewhere behind us, breathless and worried. Oliver. A tall man hurried across the grass, clearly searching every face in the crowd until his eyes landed on us. Relief washed over his expression for only a second before embarrassment quickly replaced it. He reached us, slightly out of breath, wearing jeans, running shoes, and a navy sweatshirt with playground dust across one sleeve. "Oliver," he said gently, crouching beside his son, "you can't run away like that." The little boy didn't move. He simply tightened his arms around my leg. "Daddy found me," he announced proudly. The man closed his eyes for the briefest moment, as though silently asking the universe for patience. When he looked at me again, his expression was apologetic but warm. "I'm so sorry," he said. "My name's Noah. He's been saying unusual things lately." "It's okay," I replied with an awkward laugh. "I'm Ethan." Noah offered a grateful smile that somehow looked both exhausted and genuine. "Oliver," he said softly, "this isn't Daddy." The little boy looked from his father to me and shook his head. "Yes, he is," he whispered. "I knew I'd find him today." Something about the way he said it made the air feel strangely still. There was no confusion in his eyes, no hesitation, only quiet certainty that somehow reached far deeper than a child's imagination should have. Noah gently took Oliver's hand, promising him they would talk about it later, and after another apology, they began walking away. Halfway across the park, Oliver turned around, lifted his free hand high into the air, and waved at me with a smile bright enough to stop me from opening my sketchbook again. I stood there long after they disappeared beyond the cherry trees, unable to explain why a stranger's little boy had left behind the strange feeling that somehow, against all reason, our story had only just begun. I told myself it had simply been one of those strange moments life occasionally handed to complete strangers, the kind that became a funny story shared over dinner, and forgotten a week later. Yet by Monday morning, while helping my students mix watercolor paints for their spring landscape projects, my thoughts drifted back to the little boy with bright blue eyes and unwavering certainty. Every time one of my students laughed, I heard Oliver's voice echoing inside my mind. Every time a child proudly showed me a drawing, I remembered the confidence with which he had looked at me and declared something that made absolutely no sense. By the end of the school day, I convinced myself I needed fresh air more than answers, so instead of driving straight home, I stopped at Maple Bean Café, a cozy neighborhood coffee shop only a few blocks from the elementary school. It was the kind of place where the baristas remembered regular customers by name, and the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls drifted through the room long before anyone opened the front door. I ordered my usual black coffee and found a small table beside the window, sketchbook resting unopened beside the steaming mug. Outside, people hurried along the sidewalk carrying grocery bags and backpacks, while bicycles rolled past beneath rows of flowering trees. It was ordinary, comforting, exactly what I needed. Or so I thought. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly. I glanced up without thinking, and my heart skipped. Noah stepped inside, carrying a laptop bag over one shoulder while holding Oliver's hand with the other. The little boy was enthusiastically pointing toward the pastry display, talking so fast that even from across the room I could tell his father was struggling to keep up. Noah looked tired again, though today there was something lighter in his expression, the kind of smile worn by parents who had accepted that every outing would involve at least one unexpected adventure. Before I could decide whether pretending not to notice them would be less awkward, Oliver turned his head. His face lit up like someone had switched on every light in the cafe at once. "Daddy," he shouted happily. Several customers looked around in surprise as Oliver slipped free from Noah's hand and hurried straight toward my table. Noah reacted instantly, but not quickly enough to stop him. Before the little boy reached me, "I knew you would be here," Oliver announced proudly, climbing onto the empty chair across from mine without waiting for permission. "I told Daddy Noah we would find you again." Noah arrived a second later wearing the unmistakable expression of a father who wished the floor would kindly open beneath his feet. "Ethan," he said with an embarrassed laugh, recognizing me immediately. "I cannot believe this is happening twice." I smiled despite myself. "Apparently, I am easy to find." Noah rubbed the back of his neck. "Actually, you are not. We have never been here at this hour before." Oliver leaned both elbows on the table and looked at me with complete seriousness. "I prayed before breakfast," he explained. "I asked God if I could see you again." His words were so simple, so innocent, that neither Noah nor I knew how to respond. A gentle silence settled over the table before Noah quietly sighed. "Would you mind if we sat for a few minutes? I owe you another apology, and maybe an explanation, even if I do not have one." I nodded toward the empty chairs. "Please." A few minutes later we were sharing coffee, hot chocolate, and one oversized blueberry muffin divided into 3 uneven pieces because Oliver insisted everyone should have some. Conversation came surprisingly easily. Noah told me he worked as an architect for a local design firm and had been raising Oliver alone for nearly 3 years. I spoke about teaching art and my habit of carrying a sketchbook almost everywhere. Oliver contributed by explaining that dinosaurs would probably enjoy blueberry muffins if they still existed, and that ducks always looked happier when people smiled at them. Noah laughed more than once, and every time he did, the tiredness around his eyes seemed to fade just a little. When it was finally time for them to leave, Oliver slipped his small hand into mine for only a second before joining his father at the door. "See you soon," he said with complete confidence, as though the future had already promised him another meeting. I watched them disappear onto the sidewalk, realizing that for the second time in less than 3 days, an encounter that should have ended with polite goodbyes instead left me feeling as though an invisible thread had quietly begun stitching our lives together. The following Saturday arrived with clear blue skies and the kind of gentle sunshine that convinced nearly everyone in Portland to spend the afternoon outside. I had promised myself I would stay home, finish grading art projects, water my plants, and finally organize the stack of sketches covering my dining table. Instead, just after lunch, I found myself wandering through the downtown bookstore with absolutely no reason other than enjoying the familiar scent of paper, coffee, and polished wooden shelves. Books had always been my favorite escape. They asked for nothing except a little time and rewarded you with entire worlds in return. I had just reached the children's section, searching for a beautifully illustrated picture book to use during my Monday art lesson, when I heard a delighted gasp from somewhere behind me. I did not even have to turn around before I recognized the tiny footsteps racing across the carpet. "Daddy Ethan," Oliver exclaimed with unmistakable excitement. This time, before he could wrap his arms around my waist, a calm but slightly breathless voice interrupted him. "Walking feet, remember?" Noah called with an apologetic smile as he caught up only seconds later. Oliver slowed immediately, though his grin remained just as bright. I listened, he proudly declared. I used walking feet at the end. Noah looked at me with the familiar mixture of embarrassment and amusement that had somehow become our unofficial greeting. I promise I am not following you, he said with a quiet laugh. Honestly, I was beginning to wonder the same thing. I smiled. Maybe this bookstore is simply more popular than we realized. Oliver gently slipped his hand into mine as though it had always belonged there. The gesture felt so natural that I almost forgot how unusual it should have been. Can you help me pick a dinosaur book? He asked. Daddy Noah always chooses books with too many words. Noah raised one eyebrow. Excuse me. I happen to enjoy stories. Oliver shook his head dramatically. You fall asleep before the ending. I could not help laughing, and even Noah surrendered with an exaggerated sigh. He is not entirely wrong, he admitted. Together we wandered through the brightly colored shelves while Oliver carefully inspected every cover featuring dragons, rockets, animals, or dinosaurs. He held each one up for my approval with complete confidence, never questioning whether I wanted to be included in the decision. Watching him move so comfortably between us created a strange feeling that was difficult to explain. It did not feel forced or awkward. Instead, it carried the quiet rhythm of something familiar, as though the three of us had somehow skipped the introductions that normally existed between strangers. Eventually, Oliver settled on a book about a young dinosaur who believed he could learn to fly despite everyone insisting otherwise. Because he never gives up, Oliver explained proudly. That is why I like him. Noah smiled at his son before looking toward me. He always cheers for the underdog. Maybe because someone once cheered for him, I replied without thinking. Noah's expression softened for just a moment. There was gratitude in his eyes, mixed with something quieter that neither of us seemed ready to name. After paying for the book, we stepped outside where a local street musician played an old acoustic melody beneath rows of flowering trees. Oliver asked if we could stop for ice cream before heading home. Noah hesitated only long enough to glance at his watch. One scoop, he negotiated. And only because it is Saturday. 10 minutes later, we were sitting outside a small ice cream shop. Oliver chose cookies and cream, Noah ordered coffee flavor, and I settled on vanilla. The little boy happily switched between our tableside conversations, telling me about kindergarten, informing Noah that I liked drawing, and announcing to an elderly couple walking past that he had found both of his daddies. The couple smiled warmly and wished us a wonderful afternoon before continuing down the sidewalk, never questioning his innocent declaration. Noah looked as though he wanted to correct them, yet the words never came. Instead, he quietly stirred his melting ice cream and watched Oliver laugh at a sparrow hopping beneath the nearby bench. Can I ask you something? Noah finally said after a long silence. I nodded. Does this bother you? He glanced toward Oliver before continuing. The way he keeps calling you daddy. Most people would probably avoid us by now. I looked at the little boy, who was happily offering tiny pieces of his cone to birds that clearly preferred crumbs over ice cream. Honestly, I answered, I should probably find it strange. But somehow, I do not. Noah slowly smiled, the guarded expression he always carried slipping away for the first time since we met. Neither of us noticed Oliver quietly watching us over the top of his melting cone until he whispered with complete satisfaction. See? I told you both you would be friends. Neither Noah nor I corrected him, because for reasons neither of us could explain, it no longer felt like something that needed correcting at all. The following week settled into an easy rhythm that surprised all three of us. I never planned to see Noah and Oliver. Yet somehow our paths continued crossing with almost unbelievable consistency. Sometimes it happened outside the elementary school where I taught. When Noah arrived early because his architecture office was only a few blocks away, and Oliver insisted on showing me every drawing he had made in kindergarten that week. Other times it happened at the neighborhood grocery store, where Oliver somehow spotted me before either Noah or I noticed each other. By Friday, even the cashier smiled knowingly when the little boy waved excitedly and shouted my name from halfway across the produce section. Noah eventually stopped apologizing every time we met. Instead, he would simply shake his head with an amused smile and say, I guess the universe has decided for us. I usually laughed, but somewhere inside, I had quietly stopped believing these meetings were only coincidences. One sunny afternoon, just after school dismissed, I was organizing paintbrushes when my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. For a brief second, I hesitated before opening it. "Hi, this is Noah. Oliver wanted to know if you would like to join us at the Saturday community picnic tomorrow." He promised he would ask politely this time. I smiled before I even realized I was smiling. My fingers hovered over the screen for several moments before I finally replied. "I would love to. Please tell Oliver," he already asked politely. The answer arrived almost immediately. "He says he knew you would say yes." Saturday morning welcomed us with clear skies, gentle sunshine, and the cheerful noise of neighbors gathering at Riverside Community Park. Colorful tents lined the walking paths while local musicians played familiar songs from a small wooden stage. Children chased bubbles floating through the air, volunteers grilled hamburgers and hot dogs, and families spread picnic blankets across the wide green lawn. I spotted Noah first, arranging sandwiches on a blue checkered blanket while Oliver attempted to organize a soccer ball, a frisbee, crayons, and 3 stuffed dinosaurs into what he proudly called his important supplies. The moment Oliver noticed me, he jumped to his feet and waved both arms high above his head. "Ethan is here," he announced loudly enough that several nearby families turned to look. This time he did not run toward me. Instead, he waited patiently until I reached them, looking especially proud of his self-control. I remembered my walking feet, he whispered as though sharing an important secret. "You certainly did," I replied, giving him a gentle high five. Noah smiled. "We have been practicing." The afternoon unfolded with surprising ease. We ate together, watched Oliver build elaborate castles in the sandbox with children he had met only minutes earlier, and laughed as he invented dramatic stories about brave dinosaurs protecting invisible kingdoms. Whenever he wanted to show one of us something, he instinctively reached for both our hands instead of choosing between us. At first, Noah and I exchanged awkward glances every time it happened. Eventually, we simply let him lead us wherever his imagination decided to travel next. Late in the afternoon, the community center organized a family relay race. Volunteers invited parents and children to form teams of 3. Oliver's eyes immediately sparkled with excitement. Before Noah could politely explain that there were only 2 of them, Oliver grabbed one of my hands and one of Noah's. "We already have 3, he declared confidently. Noah looked at me with an expression that silently asked whether I was comfortable joining them. I answered with a small nod before either of us spoke. The race itself was wonderfully chaotic. We balanced beanbags, hopped through colorful rings, and laughed so hard during the sack race that none of us cared we finished nearly last. Oliver celebrated as though we had won a championship trophy, proudly accepting participation ribbons for all 3 of us. As the sun slowly lowered behind the trees, we sat together watching children fly kites across the open field. Oliver rested against Noah's shoulder, clearly exhausted after an afternoon filled with non-stop excitement. Within minutes, his eyelids grew heavy until he quietly drifted asleep. Noah carefully adjusted the little blanket over his son before looking toward me. "Thank you," he said softly. He has not laughed this much in a long time. I looked at the sleeping little boy whose small hand still loosely held the edge of my sleeve. "Honestly," I replied, "I think he is giving me just as much as I am giving him." Noah did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched Oliver with the gentle expression only a devoted father could wear. After a long silence, he smiled almost to himself and quietly admitted, "Somehow, when you are around, everything feels a little lighter." His words lingered between us long after the evening breeze carried away the sounds of the festival, and for the first time, neither of us seemed eager to pretend that whatever was quietly growing between our 3 lives could still be explained away as simple coincidence. Over the next 2 weeks, our lives settled into a pattern so natural that none of us ever officially acknowledged it. Every Tuesday after my last class, Noah and Oliver would meet me at a small family diner near the school. Fridays often ended with long walks along the river, where Oliver collected smooth stones that he insisted each carried a different wish inside. Sunday mornings usually meant pancakes, neighborhood farmers markets, or visits to the public library. None of these plans were ever complicated. Somehow they simply happened, quietly becoming traditions before anyone thought to give them a name. The surprising part was not how quickly Oliver accepted me. It was how easily Noah and I learned to exist in the same peaceful space. There was never any pressure to impress each other. Sometimes we spent several minutes sitting on a park bench without speaking at all while Oliver chased squirrels across the grass or searched for imaginary pirate treasure behind old oak trees. The silence never felt uncomfortable. It felt earned, the kind that only appeared when two people slowly stopped guarding every word they said. One cool Thursday evening, rain tapped gently against the windows of Noah's house, while Oliver sat on the living room floor building an elaborate cardboard castle with colored markers and masking tape. He had invited me over after insisting that every castle needed 3 official builders. Noah prepared grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, while I helped Oliver draw tiny flags for each tower. The warm smell of toasted bread filled the kitchen, blending with the sound of quiet laughter drifting through the house. Looking around, I realized how long it had been since I had spent an evening inside a home that felt so alive. After dinner, Oliver proudly announced that his castle needed protection from invisible dragons. He disappeared upstairs to find toy knights, leaving Noah and me alone in the kitchen as we rinsed dishes together. For a while we worked in comfortable silence until Noah unexpectedly spoke. "Can I tell you something I almost never talk about?" he asked quietly. I looked over, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "Of course." He carefully dried one plate before continuing. "Oliver's other father passed away 3 years ago." The words settled gently between us. Noah stared down at the kitchen towel in his hands as though searching for the right memories. His name was Daniel. He was kind, patient, and somehow always believed tomorrow would be better than today. Even when he became sick, he spent more time worrying about Oliver and me than himself. Noah smiled sadly. After he was gone, I convinced myself that being a good father meant focusing on only one thing. Work hard. Keep Oliver safe. Never let him feel what I was feeling. He took a slow breath before looking toward the staircase where Oliver's cheerful voice echoed faintly from upstairs. I thought I was protecting him. Maybe I was really protecting myself from ever loving someone enough to lose them again. I listened without interrupting because some stories deserved quiet more than answers. After several moments, Noah looked at me with gentle curiosity. "What about you?" he asked. "You always take care of everyone else. Who took care of you?" I laughed softly, though there was very little humor behind it. For a long time, I thought I had everything figured out. A few years ago I was engaged. We had plans for a house, vacations, maybe even children someday. I paused, surprised by how easy the words felt with Noah. Eventually we realized we wanted very different futures. No betrayal. No dramatic ending. Just two people slowly growing in opposite directions until there was nothing left to hold on to. I smiled faintly. After that, I buried myself in teaching. It felt easier to help children discover their creativity than to wonder whether I had missed my own chance at building a family. Noah leaned against the counter, studying me with quiet understanding. "Funny," he said softly. "You keep saying you missed your chance." Before I could answer, Oliver came racing downstairs wearing a toy knight helmet that slipped over one eye. "Emergency," he announced dramatically. "The dragons are coming." Noah and I exchanged amused smiles before following him back into the living room. As we knelt beside the cardboard castle, pretending to defend tiny paper towers from imaginary monsters, I caught Noah watching Oliver with a peaceful expression I had never seen before. Then he looked at me, and for just a second, I had the unmistakable feeling that neither of us was thinking about the lives we had lost anymore. Instead, we were quietly wondering whether the life waiting ahead had already begun without either of us realizing it. The first weekend of June arrived with unusually warm weather, and Oliver had been counting down the days until the neighborhood children's nature festival. He had talked about the petting zoo, the face-painting booth, and the giant inflatable obstacle course almost every day since receiving the colorful flyer at kindergarten. Noah had promised to take him, and without either of us really discussing it, I had been invited too. That morning, however, my phone rang just after 7. Noah's name appeared on the screen, something he rarely did before breakfast. The moment I answered, I recognized the worry in his voice. "I am sorry to call so early," he said quietly. "Oliver woke up with a fever. We are not going anywhere today." I was already reaching for my keys before he finished speaking. "Have you seen his pediatrician?" "Yes. They think it is just a seasonal virus. They told us to let him rest, keep him hydrated, and monitor his temperature." He paused for a moment before adding, almost reluctantly, "He keeps asking if you are coming." Less than 40 minutes later, I stood outside Noah's front door carrying a grocery bag filled with chicken noodle soup, fresh fruit, children's coloring books, and the dinosaur puzzle Oliver had admired but never bought during our bookstore visit weeks earlier. Noah opened the door with tired eyes and an apologetic smile. "You really did not have to come." "I know," I answered gently. "I wanted to." Upstairs, Oliver lay curled beneath a light blue blanket, his cheeks slightly flushed, but his eyes immediately brightening when he saw me. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I did." I sat beside the bed while Noah brought a glass of water and the medicine the doctor had recommended. Oliver made a dramatic face after swallowing it, insisting it tasted worse than broccoli, which made both Noah and me laugh despite our concern. For most of the afternoon, we stayed close. Noah checked Oliver's temperature every few hours while I read dinosaur stories in exaggerated voices until the little boy drifted in and out of sleep. During one quiet moment, Oliver reached out from beneath the blanket and loosely held my hand. He never said anything. He simply seemed more comfortable knowing someone was there. Watching him sleep reminded me how small children could still be despite their endless energy. Noah stood in the doorway for several seconds before quietly motioning for me to join him downstairs. We settled at the kitchen table with untouched cups of coffee growing cold between us. "I forgot how helpless this feels," Noah admitted softly. "When he is sick, I always wish I could trade places with him." I nodded. "Every teacher feels something similar. You spend every day encouraging children to be brave, but when one of them is hurting, you would gladly carry it for them if you could." Noah looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. "Do you know what surprised me most today?" I shook my head. When I told Oliver we might have to stay home alone, he did not ask whether he would miss the festival. He only asked whether you would still visit. His quiet confession settled warmly in my chest. Before I could answer, a tiny voice echoed from upstairs. "Daddy, Noah?" We both looked toward the staircase. "Coming," Noah answered immediately. As he stood, I instinctively stood too. Without saying a word, we climbed the stairs together. Oliver was awake, looking sleepy but calmer than before. He smiled when he saw both of us enter the room at the same time. "There you are," he murmured happily before closing his eyes again. Noah gently adjusted the blanket around his son while I placed the cool washcloth back across his forehead. Our movements were so natural that neither of us needed to ask who would do what next. It felt less like two separate adults helping one child and more like a quiet routine that had somehow always existed. That evening, after Oliver's fever finally began to ease, Noah walked me to the front porch. The sunset painted the neighborhood in soft shades of gold and orange. He folded his arms against the cool evening breeze before looking at me with unmistakable gratitude. "Today would have been much harder without you," he said. I smiled gently. "You would have managed." "Maybe," he admitted, "but I do not think either of us had to." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Through the open bedroom window, we could hear Oliver sleeping peacefully at last. Noah looked toward the sound, then back at me. "Somewhere along the way," he said quietly, "you stopped feeling like a visitor in this house." I did not have an answer because the truth was written all around us. It was in the extra coffee mug already waiting in the cabinet, in the children's drawings with my name scribbled beside Noah's, and in the peaceful silence that no longer belonged to strangers. Without anyone noticing exactly when it happened, this place had quietly begun to feel like home. 3 days later, Oliver was back to chasing butterflies across the backyard as though the fever had never happened. Children seemed to possess a remarkable ability to bounce back, and seeing his laughter fill the house again felt like watching sunlight return after several cloudy days. Noah looked more rested too, although I noticed something had quietly changed between us. We no longer asked whether I wanted to stay for dinner or whether I had time to join them on an outing. Instead, Noah simply set an extra plate on the table before I arrived, and I found myself bringing groceries or dessert without thinking twice. The invitations had slowly disappeared because they were no longer necessary. One Saturday afternoon, rain kept us indoors, so Oliver announced that the living room needed to become a campsite. Every blanket in the house was transformed into walls. Every dining chair became part of an elaborate fort, and every flashlight magically turned into a campfire. Noah and I followed his instructions with complete seriousness, even though half the blankets refused to stay where Oliver wanted them. After nearly an hour of determined construction, Our masterpiece leaned slightly to one side, but remained standing. Oliver crawled inside first, proudly declaring it the safest fort in Oregon. Noah handed me a mug of hot chocolate before ducking inside beside us. The three of us sat on pillows while rain softly tapped against the windows outside. Oliver opened the dinosaur storybook we had bought together weeks earlier, but after only a few pages his eyelids began growing heavy. Recovering from being sick had clearly left him more tired than he wanted to admit. He rested his head against my shoulder without saying a word. Noah smiled warmly from across the little blanket fort. "Someone is running out of energy," he whispered. Oliver mumbled something that sounded like a protest before quietly drifting to sleep. We stayed perfectly still for several minutes, neither of us wanting to wake him. The peaceful silence felt almost sacred. Eventually Noah spoke so quietly I almost thought I had imagined it. "He trusts you completely." I looked down at the little boy sleeping peacefully beside me. "I think I trust him too." Noah smiled. "That may be the easier part." We both laughed softly before falling silent again. After another few moments, Oliver shifted slightly, but did not wake. His small voice floated through the quiet room, somewhere between dreaming and speaking. "I told you." Noah and I looked at each other. "Told us what?" Noah asked gently. Oliver's eyes remained closed. "I told you Daddy would come." Neither of us moved. The words were so calm, so certain, that they seemed to linger inside the blanket fort long after he stopped speaking. A few seconds later, he added another sleepy sentence. "I asked God every night, because Daddy." Noah smiled less after Papa went to heaven. My chest tightened. Noah lowered his eyes, blinking several times before looking back at his sleeping son. Oliver continued in the soft, wandering way children sometimes talk while half asleep. "Then I dreamed about Ethan. He was drawing pictures with me, so I knew Daddy would find us." His breathing slowly deepened again as sleep carried him away completely. The room became silent except for the steady rhythm of rain outside. Noah remained perfectly still for a long time before quietly rubbing one hand across his face. When he finally looked at me, there was unmistakable emotion in his eyes, not dramatic or overwhelming, simply honest. "He has never told me all of that before," he whispered. I did not know what to say because there was nothing logical to explain a child's quiet certainty. Maybe it had been imagination. Maybe it had been hope. Maybe children simply understood things adults had forgotten how to see. Noah gently lifted Oliver into his arms and carried him upstairs. I followed a few steps behind, pulling the blanket over the little boy once he was tucked into bed. Before leaving the room, Oliver briefly opened his sleepy eyes. He smiled at both of us standing together beside him. "See," he murmured happily. "Now nobody is lonely anymore." His eyes closed again almost immediately. Downstairs, neither Noah nor I reached for the television or our phones. We simply sat together in the quiet living room while the rain continued outside. Finally, Noah broke the silence with a voice barely above a whisper. "For the first time since Daniel passed away, this house feels full again." He turned toward me with a gentle smile that carried gratitude, hope, and something deeper neither of us needed to name yet. I smiled back, realizing that somewhere between unexpected meetings, shared meals, children's laughter, and ordinary afternoons, the empty spaces inside both our lives had begun filling with something beautifully simple. The feeling that perhaps we had already become a family long before either of us had been brave enough to admit it. Summer slowly settled over Portland, bringing longer evenings, warm breezes, and golden sunsets that seemed to linger just a little longer each day. Somewhere along the way, our calendars quietly blended together. My refrigerator now held one of Oliver's crayon drawings secured by a small magnet shaped like a paintbrush. Noah had an extra coffee mug in his kitchen that everyone casually referred to as mine. Oliver no longer asked whether I would visit on the weekend. Instead, he asked what we were going to do together, as though the answer had always been obvious. One Friday evening, after I finished helping my students prepare artwork for the annual school exhibition, Noah sent me a simple message asking if I wanted to take a walk before dinner. There was nothing unusual about the invitation, yet something in his words felt different. An hour later, we found ourselves strolling beside the river while Oliver happily skipped several yards ahead, carefully searching for smooth stones to add to his growing collection. The peaceful rhythm of the water made conversation come easily, even when neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Noah broke the silence. "Do you remember the first day at the park?" he asked with a quiet smile. I laughed softly. How could I forget? I spent the rest of that weekend wondering whether I had imagined the whole thing. Noah looked toward Oliver before answering. I spent that weekend trying to convince myself it would never happen again. We both smiled at the memory. Apparently neither of us was right, I replied. No, Noah agreed. Thankfully, we continued walking until Oliver became fascinated by a family of ducks near the edge of the water, giving us a few unexpected moments alone. Noah rested both hands in his pockets and stared across the river as the evening sunlight reflected across the gentle current. I have been thinking about something for weeks, he admitted. Every time I tried to say it, I convinced myself it was too soon. I waited quietly, sensing he needed time more than encouragement. After a slow breath, he finally looked at me. When Daniel passed away, I believed loving someone again would somehow mean leaving part of him behind. It took me a long time to understand that love does not replace love. It simply makes room for more. His voice remained calm, but every word carried quiet honesty. Then you walked into our lives, and without realizing it, you never asked us to forget anything. You simply became part of what we were already building. I felt my own emotions rising as I searched for the right words. I never wanted to take anyone's place, I answered softly. You never did, Noah replied immediately. That is exactly why you belong here. We stood together watching Oliver laugh as one curious duck followed him along the shoreline. After several peaceful moments, Noah smiled, almost shyly. Can I ask you something? Anything. Would you like to stop feeling like a guest? I turned toward him, unsure whether I had heard him correctly. Noah's gentle smile grew a little brighter. I'm not talking about moving in tomorrow or changing our lives overnight. I am talking about us, about choosing this, about giving ourselves permission to see where this relationship can honestly go instead of pretending we are only very good friends. My heart felt impossibly light. There was no grand speech, no dramatic declaration, only two people standing beside a quiet river after months of ordinary moments that had slowly become extraordinary. I smiled before answering. I thought we had already started without admitting it. Noah laughed, the warm, genuine laugh I had come to love hearing. I was hoping you would say that. Without hesitation, he reached for my hand. The gesture was simple, gentle, and completely natural. Our fingers intertwined as though they had practiced the movement 1,000 times before. Neither of us rushed the moment. Neither of us needed to. A few seconds later, Oliver came running back toward us, proudly holding a perfectly smooth gray stone in both hands. He stopped in front of us, looked down at our joined hands, then looked back up with the widest smile either of us had ever seen. Finally, he said with complete satisfaction, I was wondering how long that was going to take. Noah and I laughed at exactly the same time. Oliver slipped between us, taking Noah's free hand with one hand and mine with the other. Together we continued walking along the river as the evening sun painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. For everyone else passing by, we probably looked like an ordinary little family enjoying a beautiful summer evening. The remarkable part was that, for the first time, none of us felt the need to wonder whether that picture was real, because quietly, naturally, and one ordinary day at a time, it had become our truth. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the maple trees outside Oliver's kindergarten in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Life had continued moving forward with the same gentle rhythm that had first brought the three of us together. Some mornings I still left early for school, carrying lesson plans and sketchbooks. Noah still disappeared into long meetings with clients before coming home with stories about impossible building requests. Oliver still managed to fill every room with enough laughter to make even ordinary days feel unforgettable. The difference was that none of us faced those ordinary days alone anymore. One Friday afternoon, I volunteered to pick Oliver up because Noah was running late after visiting a construction site outside the city. I arrived a few minutes before dismissal, standing near the front entrance with several other parents and grandparents waiting patiently beneath the colorful paper leaves the children had taped across the classroom windows. When the bell finally rang, dozens of excited voices rushed into the hallway. Oliver spotted me almost immediately. His entire face lit up as he raced toward me carrying an oversized backpack that looked nearly as big as he was. His teacher, Mrs. Collins, smiled warmly as she walked beside him. Oliver, she said with a gentle laugh, you forgot to introduce me. Oliver looked up at me with complete confidence before turning back to her. "This is my daddy." Mrs. Collins smiled kindly and extended her hand. "It is so nice to finally meet you. Oliver talks about his family every single day." I shook her hand, suddenly feeling my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Before I could explain anything, Noah hurried through the school doors, still wearing his work jacket and carrying the familiar expression of someone worried about arriving late. Mrs. Collins looked between the two of us for only a moment before smiling even more warmly. "Perfect," she said. "Now I have met both of Oliver's dads." Noah glanced at me. I looked back at him. Neither of us corrected her. We simply smiled. Oliver reached for both our hands exactly as he always did, completely unaware that the quiet truth he had been carrying since the very beginning had finally become visible to everyone else. We walked home together beneath trees that gently released golden leaves with every passing breeze. Halfway through the neighborhood park, Oliver suddenly stopped and pointed toward the old wooden bench where everything had first begun months earlier. "That is where I found Daddy," he said proudly. Noah smiled at him before looking at me. "No," he answered softly. "I think that is where all three of us found each other." Oliver seemed satisfied with that answer and skipped ahead toward the playground, giving Noah and me a few peaceful moments alone. Noah reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "I found this while cleaning Daniel's old desk," he explained quietly. "It is something he wrote before Oliver was born." I carefully unfolded the page. In neat handwriting, one sentence had been underlined twice. "The greatest gift we can ever give our child is a home filled with love, no matter what that home eventually looks like." I looked up slowly. Noah's eyes glistened, but his smile never faded. "For a long time I believed I had failed that promise," he admitted. "Now I think we finally kept it." I folded the paper carefully and handed it back. Instead of putting it away, Noah slipped it into my hand again. "Keep it," he whispered. "It belongs to all of us now." A familiar voice interrupted us before I could answer. "Come push me on the swings," Oliver called from across the playground. Noah laughed softly. We should not keep our boss waiting. Together we walked toward the swings where Oliver was already sitting with endless patience, his sneakers brushing against the fallen leaves beneath him. Noah stood behind one side while I stood behind the other, and together we gave the swing a gentle push. Oliver laughed so freely that nearby children could not help smiling too. Higher and higher he soared beneath the bright autumn sky, completely trusting the two people standing behind him. As I watched him, I finally understood something that had taken months to learn. Families were not always formed by perfect plans or predictable paths. Sometimes they began with an unexpected meeting, a child's unwavering faith, and countless ordinary moments shared with open hearts. Sometimes love arrived quietly, asking for nothing except the courage to welcome it. Oliver glanced back at us one last time before stretching both arms toward the sky with complete joy. "I told you," he shouted happily. "I knew my family would find each other." This time, neither Noah nor I had any reason to doubt him. Winter announced itself with the first gentle snowfall of the year, covering rooftops, sidewalks, and tree branches in a blanket of quiet white. Oliver pressed both hands against the living room window before sunrise, his excitement filling the house long before either Noah or I had finished our first cup of coffee. "It snowed," he shouted with enough enthusiasm to make the announcement sound like the greatest surprise in history. Within half an hour, the three of us were bundled in scarves, gloves, and thick winter coats, stepping into the crisp morning air while our footprints became the first ones across the untouched yard. Oliver immediately declared that our most important mission was building the friendliest snowman in Oregon. Noah laughed as he rolled the largest snowball across the lawn, pretending it was much heavier than it actually was, while Oliver carefully searched for the perfect sticks to use as arms. I contributed an old knit scarf from my coat pocket and sketched a smiling face in the fresh snow beside our creation. Before long, neighbors passing by stopped to compliment Oliver's masterpiece, and he proudly introduced every detail, making certain everyone knew that all three of us had built it together. After nearly an hour outside, frozen fingers and rosy cheeks finally convinced us to return indoors. The warm scent of cinnamon hot chocolate greeted us as soon as the front door closed. Noah disappeared into the kitchen while Oliver and I spread blankets across the living room floor to create another indoor fort, continuing a tradition that had somehow survived every season. While we worked, Oliver quietly looked around the room before asking a question in the thoughtful voice children sometimes used when something truly mattered to them. "Can I ask something important?" I nodded immediately. "You can ask anything." He looked at both of us before speaking. "Will Ethan still live with us when I am bigger?" Noah and I exchanged surprised glances. We had never formally discussed living together with Oliver because life had simply continued drawing us closer one ordinary day at a time. Noah walked over and sat beside his son. "What makes you ask that?" Oliver shrugged with complete honesty. "Because families stay together. And I like when we are all home." The simplicity of his answer left no room for complicated explanations. Noah looked at me with quiet understanding before reaching for my hand. "I like that too," he admitted softly. I smiled. Feeling warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the fireplace glowing nearby. "So do I." Oliver grinned as though he had just solved the easiest puzzle in the world. "Good," he announced. "Then we should make Ethan a room." Noah laughed. "I think we can probably do even better than that." Over the next several weeks, our conversations slowly turned into plans. We talked about practical things first, like closet space, commuting to work, and how to combine two homes without rushing anything. Every decision felt calm and thoughtful because none of us wanted to build our future on excitement alone. We wanted to build it on the same steady trust that had quietly grown from shared breakfasts, evening walks, storybooks, and countless ordinary moments. By early January, my books lined the shelves in Noah's study, my favorite coffee mug sat beside his in the kitchen cabinet, and my sketchbooks occupied the sunny corner of the living room where Oliver insisted the afternoon light was perfect for drawing. Nothing dramatic marked the day I officially moved in. There were no speeches or celebrations. Oliver simply helped carry a box filled with colored pencils into the house and proudly announced, "Now everything is where it belongs." That evening we ordered pizza, spread it across the dining table, and laughed when Oliver carefully assigned seats by declaring that every family dinner needed everyone together. Later, after he had fallen asleep upstairs, Noah and I stood quietly in the kitchen listening to the peaceful silence filling the house. He slipped one arm gently around my shoulders and smiled toward the staircase. "You know," he said softly, "I spent years believing home was a place I had already lost." I rested my hand over his. "Maybe home was never something waiting behind us," I replied. "Maybe it was something patiently waiting ahead." Noah nodded slowly. Outside, fresh snow continued, falling beneath the porch light, covering every old footprint until the yard looked untouched again, ready for a new beginning. Inside, surrounded by laughter that still seemed to linger in every room, I realized that the greatest changes in life rarely arrived all at once. Sometimes they appeared quietly, one ordinary day after another, until you suddenly looked around and discovered that the life you had once dreamed about was no longer a dream at all. It was simply the beautiful, everyday reality waiting for you each time you walked through the front door. By the time February arrived, our new routine no longer felt new. It simply felt like life. Every weekday morning began with Noah making coffee while I packed Oliver's lunch. Oliver insisted on helping by placing a handwritten note inside his lunchbox every Friday, usually decorated with uneven hearts, smiling dinosaurs, or stick figures that somehow always included the three of us holding hands. Noah claimed the notes were meant for Oliver, but somehow they always made both of us smile just as much. Even the neighbors had quietly accepted our little family without anyone ever needing to explain it. Mrs. Henderson from next door often waved as she watered her porch plants and occasionally sent over homemade cookies that Oliver insisted tasted better because they came from the cookie grandma. Saturday mornings belonged to the farmer's market, and Sunday afternoons usually ended with art projects spread across the dining table, while Noah pretended not to complain about the glitter that somehow found its way into every corner of the house. One chilly afternoon, Oliver came home carrying a bright red folder from kindergarten. He burst through the front door with the excitement of someone holding the greatest secret in the world. "Family Day," he announced before anyone had even taken off a coat. "We have Family Day next Friday." He eagerly spread colorful papers across the kitchen table while Noah and I leaned closer to read the information sheet. Every student had been invited to bring family members into the classroom for an afternoon of activities, crafts, and storytelling. Parents, grandparents, siblings, or anyone special in the child's life was welcome. Oliver looked from Noah to me with complete certainty. "You are both coming." Noah smiled immediately. "I would not miss it." I nodded. "Neither would I." Oliver clapped happily before running upstairs to find his crayons because, according to him, every important event required a countdown calendar. Throughout the week, he reminded us each morning exactly how many days remained until Family Day, reducing the number with such excitement that by Thursday evening the anticipation had become contagious. When Friday finally arrived, I left school early with permission from the principal while Noah adjusted his work schedule to meet us at Oliver's kindergarten. The classroom had been transformed with colorful banners, tiny chairs arranged in circles, and children's artwork covering every available wall. Laughter filled the room as families gathered around craft tables decorated with construction paper, markers, and glue sticks. Mrs. Collins greeted us warmly before leading everyone through several activities. Children proudly introduced family members, built paper houses together, and shared stories about the people they loved most. Oliver never left our sides for more than a few seconds. During the final activity, each child received a large sheet of paper titled "My Family." They were encouraged to draw the people who made them feel safe, happy, and loved. Noah quietly worked beside Oliver while I helped organize markers for nearby children. After several peaceful minutes, Oliver tugged gently on my sleeve. "Finished," he whispered proudly. He held up the drawing with both hands. 3 smiling figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. Noah wore his favorite blue jacket. I held a sketchbook. Oliver stood between us wearing a superhero cape because he insisted every family picture needed one superhero. Above our heads, in large, uneven letters, he had carefully written, "My daddies and me." My eyes filled before I even realized it. Mrs. Collins happened to walk past at that exact moment. She smiled at the drawing before looking toward us. "Oliver talks about his family with so much love," she said warmly. "He has a wonderful support system." Noah placed one hand gently against my back as we admired the picture together. "He certainly gives us something to live up to," he replied softly. On the drive home, Oliver fell asleep in his booster seat, clutching the drawing carefully against his chest as though it were the most valuable treasure in the world. After parking in the driveway, neither Noah nor I rushed to wake him. We simply sat in the quiet car, watching gentle snowflakes drift through the afternoon sky. Noah finally broke the silence. "Do you remember when you said you thought you had missed your chance at having a family?" I smiled faintly. "I remember." He reached across the center console and intertwined his fingers with mine. "I hope you know now that you never missed it. You were simply taking the long road to the right destination." I looked back at Oliver sleeping peacefully in the back seat, still holding the picture that had captured our entire story with the simple honesty only a child possessed. Sometimes adults spent years searching for perfect words to describe love, belonging, and home. Oliver had managed to draw all of it with a handful of crayons and one joyful sentence, reminding us once again that the truest things in life were often the simplest. Spring returned almost without us noticing. The snow disappeared from the sidewalks, flower beds awakened beneath the morning sun, and the cherry trees lining our street bloomed with the same soft pink blossoms that had been falling through the air on the day Oliver first ran across Riverside Park. Looking back, it felt impossible that an entire year had passed. The seasons had quietly carried us from strangers to something much deeper, stitching our lives together with hundreds of ordinary moments that none of us would ever call ordinary again. One Saturday morning, Oliver burst into the kitchen wearing an apron that nearly reached his ankles and announced that today was Family Breakfast Championship Day. According to his carefully handwritten rules, everyone had to help cook. Nobody was allowed to complain about the mess, and pancakes tasted better if someone laughed while flipping them. Noah read the list with complete seriousness before saluting the tiny self-appointed referee. "Yes, Chef Oliver." I was assigned blueberry duty while Noah handled the pancake batter. Predictably, flour somehow ended up on the counter, the floor, and even across the tip of Noah's nose. Oliver laughed so hard that he accidentally dropped a blueberry into the orange juice pitcher, insisting that it made the drink extra healthy. By the time breakfast reached the table, the pancakes were different sizes. One was slightly overcooked, and another looked suspiciously like the state of Oregon. None of us cared. They were easily the best pancakes we had ever eaten because every bite tasted like home. Later that afternoon, we decided to walk through Riverside Park before visiting the local spring art fair. Families spread blankets beneath flowering trees while children chased colorful kites across the open field. The familiar wooden bridge reflected peacefully across the pond, and for a long moment, I simply stood there remembering the quiet life I believed I had wanted before everything changed. Noah noticed my thoughtful expression and gently slipped his hand into mine. "Thinking about something?" he asked. I smiled. I was remembering the man who used to come here alone with a sketchbook. Noah looked around the park before meeting my eyes again. "Do you miss him?" I considered the question honestly. "No," I answered after a moment. "I understand him now." He thought protecting his heart meant keeping it empty. He did not realize the safest place for a heart is actually with people who choose it every day. Noah squeezed my hand gently. "I think the man I used to be needed to hear that too." Oliver came running back, carrying 3 dandelions clutched carefully in his small fist. "One for each, Daddy," he announced before handing the 3rd flower to himself with complete satisfaction. We laughed together and continued toward the art fair, where local painters, photographers, and sculptors displayed their work beneath white tents. While Noah and Oliver wandered toward a booth featuring handmade wooden toys, I paused beside an elderly artist selling watercolor landscapes. He studied one of my sketches that I had absent-mindedly been carrying in my notebook before smiling kindly. "You draw families beautifully," he observed. I looked down at the sketch without realizing what I had created. It showed Noah reading a bedtime story while Oliver leaned against his shoulder, and I sat nearby sketching them both. I had drawn it from memory weeks earlier. "Thank you," I replied quietly. The artist nodded toward the picture. "The interesting thing is that everyone in your drawing is looking at someone else instead of themselves. That is usually how you recognize real love." His simple observation stayed with me long after we left the fair. That evening, after dinner, Oliver asked if we could visit the park one last time before sunset because he wanted to feed the ducks. As the sky slowly turned shades of gold and lavender, we stood together beside the same pond where our story had unknowingly begun. Oliver tossed small pieces of birdseed into the water before suddenly turning toward us. "Can we take a picture?" he asked. Noah handed his phone to a passing couple, who happily offered to help. We stood together beneath the blooming cherry trees. Oliver insisted on standing in the middle while holding both our hands exactly as he always had. Just before the picture was taken, he looked up at Noah, then at me, and smiled with the quiet certainty that had guided him from the very beginning. "This is my favorite family picture," he whispered. The camera captured more than smiling faces that evening. It captured gratitude, healing, second chances, and the remarkable truth that love rarely arrives according to careful plans. More often, it quietly walks into your life disguised as an ordinary day, patiently waiting for you to recognize that the family you have been searching for has been walking beside you all along. 1 year later, the cherry trees at Riverside Park bloomed once again, covering the familiar paths with soft pink petals that drifted gently through the spring breeze. Every season had left behind its own quiet memories, yet somehow this place still felt exactly the way it had on the afternoon everything changed. Only now, instead of standing alone with a sketchbook, I stood beside Noah while Oliver raced ahead carrying a small paper kite decorated with 3 smiling stick figures. Some things in life changed slowly enough that you hardly noticed them until an entire year had passed. Noah's laughter came more easily now. The shadows that had once lingered behind his eyes had softened into peaceful confidence. My sketchbooks, once filled with strangers sitting on park benches or walking through city streets, had become collections of familiar faces, bedtime stories, pancake breakfasts, school projects, and quiet evenings spent together at home. Oliver had grown taller too. His backpack no longer looked larger than he was, and his questions had become even more wonderfully endless. He still believed every Saturday deserved pancakes, every rainy day deserved a blanket fort, and every sunset deserved at least one family walk before bedtime. Some beliefs, I realized, deserved to stay exactly the way they were. We found our favorite bench beside the duck pond, the very same place where my quiet life had unexpectedly collided with a little boy who refused to believe strangers existed. Oliver carefully spread a picnic blanket across the grass before pulling something from his backpack. "I made this at school," he announced proudly. He handed us a folded piece of construction paper covered with colorful drawings. On the front, written in careful block letters, were the words, "The best thing that ever happened to me." Inside was another picture of the three of us standing beneath cherry blossoms. Beneath the drawing, in slightly uneven handwriting, Oliver had written, "Some people think families begin when babies are born. I think families begin when people choose each other every day." Noah quietly read the sentence twice before looking at me with eyes that reflected both joy and gratitude. "I think our son just became wiser than both of us," he whispered. I smiled as Oliver happily chased ducks along the edge of the pond, completely unaware that he had just given us one of the greatest gifts we had ever received. Noah slipped his hand into mine. "Do you remember what you said the first time we met?" "At the park?" he asked. I laughed softly. I said Oliver had the wrong person. Noah gently shook his head. "No, I think he found exactly the right person. The only ones who were confused were us." We watched Oliver kneel near the water, talking very seriously to a duck that appeared surprisingly interested in the conversation. The peaceful silence between Noah and me no longer needed words. It had become the language of ordinary happiness, built through shared mornings, patient understanding, forgiveness, and countless small choices to stay present for one another. After lunch, Oliver tugged excitedly on both our hands. "Come on," he insisted. "We need one more picture." A kind older couple walking nearby happily offered to take it. Oliver carefully positioned us beneath the largest cherry tree before stepping into the middle exactly as he always had. "Everybody smile," he instructed. Just before the camera clicked, he looked up at both of us and quietly said, "Thank you for finding me." The words caught both Noah and me completely by surprise. We smiled through unexpected tears, and the photograph captured something no camera could fully explain. It captured the moment three ordinary lives finally understood that they had never been waiting for luck, destiny, or perfect timing. They had simply been waiting for one another. On the walk home, Oliver skipped several steps ahead before suddenly turning around. "Daddy Noah?" "Yes." Noah answered. "Daddy Ethan?" "I am here," I replied. Oliver grinned with complete satisfaction. "Good. I was just making sure." Noah laughed softly and wrapped one arm around my shoulders as we continued down the familiar sidewalk toward home. The afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the path ahead, but this time those shadows always stayed together. Looking back, people might think our story began with an impossible coincidence or a remarkable moment that changed everything. They would be wrong. Our story truly began with something much quieter. It began the first time a little boy believed in love before the adults around him were brave enough to believe in it themselves, and because one child never stopped believing, too. Lonely hearts finally discovered that the family they had been searching for had been walking toward them all along.